Hello, BookTube. Well, it's a beautiful day here in Boston. Mild, 70 degrees, 75 degrees, not a breath of wind, bright blue sky, and it was all morning long. Last night was the first night really where you could leave the windows open all night long and you wouldn't suffer for it at 3 in the morning. Uh, and I didn't go to the Brattle bookshop last week. So those conditions already predisposed me to go to the Brattle bookshop today. That predisposition was strengthened enormously by the fact that not only is it going to rain tomorrow, but it could rain for the next 4 days. And whenever rain or in ye olden days snow was coming to Boston, that would always create an impulse in me to go to the shop and stock up, even though I have thousands and thousands of books and 10,000 as ebooks. So I don't need to stock up at all. I still feel that compulsion. And in my own defense, I also had errands to run. In that area, a couple of errands to run that weren't connected to the Brattle bookshop. When those errands were done, I wandered over to the Brattle. Those of you who are new to the channel, the Brattle is a used bookstore in downtown Boston, and they're great. They turn over their stock all the time, and the prices are really reasonable. But they also have an outdoor sale lot that's enormous. It's not just a cart or two, like you might be familiar with. Maybe your own used bookstore has a cart outside on the sidewalk. No, they have a dozen carts and thousands of books out there at $1, $3, and $5. It was a beautiful morning, not a single bite of cold. Of course, this summer won't get what I consider to be hot. It can't get hot enough for me. But it wasn't cold. I've gone to the Brattle in all kinds of weather. I've stood there out in the carts when it was sleeting. So it was perfect to browse. So I did. I went over to the Brattle and I browsed. And I got a gigantic pile of books. By random chance, the pile that I ended up selecting is full of incredibly heavy hardcovers, and I had to lug them all back by myself. But I did. I did, because I'm pretty much the greatest person who's ever lived. So I want to show you what I got. We'll start with the mass market paperbacks, all by the same author, and all driven by BookTube. Because coming up right around the corner, just 3 weeks from now, is June on the Range, a beloved BookTube event in which we all read Westerns. I've been stocking up with paperbacks for June on the Range and one hardcover for the whole of the year. I don't read Westerns. Now that June on the Range exists, I don't read Westerns at any other time. Unless they come to me as a new release, I don't read them. So I've been stocking up on a lot of those. I figured, I went today, I was thinking, what if you see more Westerns? And I thought, all right, let's slow down on the stocking up. Let's finish up today with your stocking up and don't get any more, because you have plenty of Westerns now. And I have all these as ebooks, but I found them as mass market paperbacks, and they have their appeal that way. They're all Louis Lamore. I found 4 Louis Lamore. The Mountain Valley War, with that great cover. Just look at that. I know I extol the artwork of these Louis Lamore covers, some of them. Louis Lamore, before, he's not in mass market anymore. I don't know if he's in bookstores anymore. But for 60 years, he was a hugely best-selling author. Everything he did, you could reprint his whole line, and you would sell it. So he had different cover illustrations. Depending on different periods, Louis Lamore's pictures always look different. But this is the Mountain Valley War, and then I got Taggart with an enigmatic cover, right? These are not the same. This is a different artist, and also enigmatic. What is going on here? Does he know that they are there, or are they hunting for him? Got a man here and a man right there. Interesting cover. Then we have another terrific old illustration. This is Silver Canyon, where you see a man on horseback, and it takes your eye a second to realize he's got a body slung over the saddle. Terrific. The cover immediately makes you want to read the book. And then the High Graders. And I found a later cover of the High Graders. The one earlier, the one done in this style, is actually excellent. It's a wonderful cover. This is not that, but you can't only care about the cover. I got this, which is a fairly static. You've got a man on a horse with ominous storm clouds behind him. But you also have a tombstone. So that he's looking at it. So that adds a little thing. I got Louis L'Amour mass markets. I'm not expecting to find a million Louis L'Amour mass markets, but there's something about reading Westerns on a hot summer afternoon in a dime store paperback that really feels fitting, in a way that e-copies do not, maybe. Then, what else do we get here? The one work of fiction, other than Louis L'Amour, was a trade paperback. All the others are hardcovers. And only 2 of those hardcovers are the normal size. All the others are enormous, just absolutely enormous. I found the galley copy of The Seventh Samurai by Helen DeWitt with the deckled edges, and with someone clipped out the New York Times review and the New Yorker review and put it in this book. Didn't have a copy of this book. I checked. I don't think this was my review copy. I don't think it was, even though I would have loved it. This is the form I like this form better than the hardcover that came out, better than any paperback that I've seen. And also, I do this. I put reviews in books like this. But I don't think this is my review copy. But either way, it is the physical copy of The Seventh Samurai that I would want. Just ideally, it is. So it was great. Then we have a thin hardcover. This, in some ways, could be the find of the day. The find of the day was a huge book. And I'm going to save it for last. Because I've been waiting for 10 years, more than that, to see it at the Brattle for $1. But I found this thing. This is edited by Hugh and Robin Popham. And it is A Thirst for the Sea. It's the sailing adventures of Erskine Childers, will be familiar to BookTube because he wrote the novel The Riddle of the Sands, a prototypical spy novel. Just an incredible reading experience, every bit as engrossing now as it was 100 years ago. And it was his only work of fiction. And it sold like griddle cakes. Oh my God, it just took off like crazy. And still, I believe The Riddle of the Sands is still in print. When some booktubers encounter it for Spring into Adventure or Dr. November or whatever, it holds up. It really holds up. It is every bit as thrilling now as it was when it was originally written. And Erskine Childers is an odd kind of figure. He wrote that one book, and it gave him an income for the rest of his life. But he didn't seem to care much about fiction. He seemed to want to write other things. He was very political, very much involved in first British imperialist politics. He was, believe it or not, when he was in the Boer War with Mark from Book Time with Elvis, he was a hottie. You'd never know it from what he looks like. You could barely make that out. But then wholeheartedly involved in the cause of Irish independence, in Irish politics. Knew Eamon de Valera, knew Michael Collins. He fell in love with that subject at around the same time that he fell in love with the woman who would be the love of his life. And he fell in love with both of those things in a town that he fell in love with, and that town's name was Boston. Before he crossed the sea again and never came back. But although Riddle of the Sands was the only novel that he wrote, he did keep writing. He wrote a lot. Most of his books are so topical, they're so rabble-rousing, they're so in the weeds of the politics that obsessed him, that I don't know what kind of reading they would make for a general reader. But this, the whole of his life, Childers was a passionate amateur salesman, a sailor. He taught himself. Virtually everything that he learned about seafaring, he taught himself. He and his brother had a succession of very small sailing crafts, and it was an abiding love of his life. And I've only read one biography of this guy, and it was a long time ago. He's long overdue for another one. But in the one biography that I read, there were tantalizing hints here and there that in addition to loving sailing, he also wrote about sailing for a couple of sailing groups, private letters, private newsletters or whatnot, never for publication. And here is all of that writing. According to the editors, all of that writing was saved, and all of it is presented here, including letters and all kinds of other things, all about his nautical love, his nautical adventures. How incredible. A perfect example of the kind of weird gem that the Brattle crops up regularly. That's just wonderful. Then this next one, I've had this as a mass market paperback a few times. Found it as a hardcover for $1, and I definitely want it. I've got a biography section. That's what it's for. And this figure is too important to have only one biography. I have one biography of him. But I got Stanley Ailing's biography of George III, which I've never had in a hardcover before, just in a crappy mass market paperback. I really enjoy this book. It's a totally different reading experience from Andrew Roberts' book on George III. Totally different, but in a good way, in the way that you want. You want both of them. This is far more stately and far more willing to find fault with George III, which I have no trouble doing. Then we have Wynne Craig Wade. This is his book on the Titanic. Uh, I have Walter Lord's book on the Titanic, of course, and there was a Titanic book that I think was called Unsinkable from about 20 years ago that was excellent, really excellent. It didn't try to steal the crown from The Night Lives On, or A Night to Remember, rather, Walter Lord's book and his sequel, The Night Lives On. What I wouldn't give for a big decal edge French flap trade paperback of A Night to Remember and A Night Lives On, reprint them. They were classics. They sold millions and millions of copies. Reprint them, but no, I'm not in charge. But I have Walter Lord's two books, and I have that book Unsinkable, but nothing else on the Titanic. And I didn't have this one. I don't think I've ever even read this. If I'm remembering correctly, this emphasizes rather pleasingly the politics of the day. It goes into great detail in the politics of the day. Of course, the politics of the day is the politics of the Taft administration. So we'll see. If I remember that correctly, that's going to be really enjoyable. But I'm up for reading about the subject anyway. The subject fascinates me and always has. Then this next one, I don't really know what I was thinking with this next one. It was $1. That's no good excuse. It's really heavy. It's a duplicate. And as an author I don't particularly like. You'd think if all those things lined up, I wouldn't get it. But I did, and I don't know why. Maybe I'll get rid of it right away. This is John Updike, Odd Jobs. This is a big volume of his collected work. He was, much like a couple of the authors that we've already mentioned, he was an indefatigable writer of occasional prose in addition to all the crappy novels that he was churning out. And that occasional prose is much better than his crappy novels. Not that that's hard, but his occasional prose is really good. I have a neat trade paperback of this that I think one of you gave me. No idea why I grabbed this. Just the deckled edges? No idea. Maybe because it's stuffable with articles and the trade paperback is not. I grabbed it. Probably I will read a lot of it. Maybe even tonight. In this hardcover. Ordinarily, the thing that determines what I'm going to read at night is my mail. The mail of new books. But the mail today was almost entirely very entertaining books. Very good-looking books. But all from months and months from now. So nothing I'm going to read tonight. I have May books that I can read, but I always save room for a couple of the Brattle Hall books if I go to the Brattle that day. And this might be one of them. It might win out over all these others. You never know. Then this next one is by Charles MacDonald. This is Mighty Endeavor. This is a big one-volume look at the U.S. Army in World War II in the European theater. This is written by a guy who was the Army's official historian, same as Samuel L. Morrison was for the Navy. I've just recently got The Guns at Last Light by Rick Atkinson, which is almost exactly the same thing. But this will be different. Every author strains these things differently, and the prose will be different. I had this once upon a time as a trade paperback that I believe was torn apart by beagles. In fact, if I remember correctly, my trade paperback of The Mighty Endeavor was torn apart by a beagle who never tore apart anything. He just took a dislike to that book. He just did. He just took a dislike to that book. I came back and it was in pieces, and he was still chewing on the hardcover. And he looked at me like, I don't know what came over me. I was saying, "What are you doing, old man? You don't tear things apart." But one way or another, he's long gone. He's 30 years gone. I've got this now in a hardcover to go on the World War II shelf. Then this next one, I am doing a read-along of Nicholas Montserrat's great novel, The Cruel Sea. On this channel, I'm doing a read-along. You're welcome to find a copy. Ask me for a copy. I'll find you one. And do a read-along with me. And it's about a corvette named the Compass Rose. A kind of vessel, a new class of vessel that was small and ungainly, and it was meant to accompany the destroyers that were protecting convoys of civilian shipping from German U-boats. And the corvettes didn't have much in the way of firepower like the destroyers did, but they did have depth charges. They were basically platforms for dropping depth charges. And in The Cruel Sea, the Compass Rose is commanded by a Royal Navy commander. A thorough professional, someone whose life is the Navy. And in this ragtag world of ships being manned with whatever to get them to sea and get the job done, he's the only Royal Navy person on board. So in his view, he's the only professional in a crew of more or less trained amateurs. And even in the first couple of sections of the book that we've read so far for the Cruel Steve read-along, allusions are made many times to the fact that he's not the only one. that commanders and first lieutenants or first officers on many vessels who are Royal Navy are having to deal with all these other people, these civilian reserve people that volunteer reserves that are coming on board that don't have the same kind of training, the same kind of tradition. I've been thinking about that. I'm loving rereading The Cruel Sea. And then I found this thing. This is by Corelli Barnett, and it is Engage the Enemy More Closely. It's a history of the Royal Navy during World War II. How incredible. How amazing. I've never even heard of this book. We'll see how good the author is at telling the story, but I was overjoyed to find it. Big, thick thing on the Royal Navy in World War II. Maybe I'll love it. We'll stick to the naval theme here. I don't quite know why. Quite a few naval things going on here. This is a pure Brattle thing. This is a type of Steve book that the Brattle gets. They get it regularly out in the sale lot, and no one else is going to want it. People are going to look at it and say, I don't even know who that is, and I don't want to know. It's a pure Steve book. I've lost track of how many people, how many young men I have gone to the Brattle with over the decades who see something like this now and who would see something like this at the Brattle and say, it's a Steve book. And those young men, eventually they left Boston, they would find greener fields, they would go on to jobs elsewhere. They'd still love books. And when they go to used bookstores, they would send me pictures or letters or then emails saying, look, I found a Steve book, because they never became interested in these things, but they could still spot them a mile away. And this is a perfect example of that. This is by Elting Morrison, and it is a biography of Admiral Sims. He was a extremely decorated, extremely vigorous, extremely reform-minded Navy bigwig at the turn of the 20th century. Really, the cover is rather well designed. I don't know if you're going to be able to make it out, but the cover is just quotes from him predicting the nature of the evolution of naval warfare, and all the quotes are right. And that's why they're here, because all the quotes are right. One of them is, merchant ships will have to be convoyed in fleets. He was saying that when Theodore Roosevelt was president. It turned out to be entirely true. He said the airplane carrier is the battleship of the future. Entirely true. I believe there is no case on record where allies have operated together for any considerable length of time without more or less friction. I am out to make an exception in this matter, where the allies do work together in World War I and then World War II. And I did not know that this biography existed. I did not know that it existed. I'm going to love reading this. I probably won't be, totally in love with his early life. Probably not. But once he comes to the attention of Theodore Roosevelt had worked for the Navy. He'd been in charge of a chunk of the Navy and felt the same thing. Had all sorts of reforming thoughts the same way. We aren't updating our gunnery. We aren't updating our tactics. We aren't updating our fueling methods or anything like that. We aren't updating our ship designs. And we really need to, just in case war comes. We really need to. In 1905, it was entirely possible, even for men like Roosevelt, to think war wouldn't come. But better to be prepared. Of course, they didn't have the slightest idea of what the 20th century had in store. No one did. Not the slightest idea. So I love it for that part. And I don't know, I haven't checked the index. I don't know how much of this will deal with the Taft administration. Because Sims caused President Taft a couple of rather major headaches. That Taft had a Secretary of the Navy, a wonderful Boston man, who wrote a memoir. God, I have no idea if I'll ever. That would be a Steve book to end all Steve books, but I doubt that I would ever find it. His name was Von Meyer. I don't know that I would ever find that book. But he ran herd on Sims quite often, because Sims had the same propensity that George Patton did in World War II, which is to make horrible comments that would make anyone blanch. And to usually be careful to make them in private with no prying ears around, but not always. Not always. He made one, I'm sure that it's a story in this book, he made one of those comments was just a howler. And it caused all sorts of outrage from the people who heard it, who knew that he was talking about them as shirkers and subhumans. And it got to Taft. It reached the president, who was incandescently furious about it for half an hour. Being furious takes lots of energy. So Taft was not ever incandescently furious for long. One of his biographers says that he was a very good hater. And that's true. but low intensity hatred. When he learned about this incident, he was furious. Meyer caught the brunt of it. He was furious about it. As one critic who was not quite in the room but just outside the room said, Taft, when he wanted to, could let loose a string of profanities that only a Unitarian could do. I know in 20 minutes or so Taft had calmed down, but he still reprimanded Sims. A formal reprimand, a public reprimand. And that was before Sims went on to clash with Woodrow Wilson, to be involved in World War I. This is going to be fascinating. One of the many, many admirals that litter history, but I did not know. I can't wait to get to this book. It is absolutely a Steve book. I'm going to be right at home. I'm not going to need any of the principles explained to me. And then the last one, the find of the day. I've been waiting to find this thing. Talk about a book where I'm not going to need any of the principles explained to me. I know this. We're moving from a U.S. president that I know really well to another U.S. president that I know really well. Let's just put it that way. This is by Michael O'Brien. I have mentioned this book to a million of you because I have, for 8 years on this channel, got the question over and over again, what is your favorite biography of John F. Kennedy? And I finally, I've been recommending this book without having it. I finally got a copy of it. It's this. It's this. John F. Kennedy, a biography, Michael O'Brien. And I finally found it, thank God. This is the Kennedy book to get if you're only going to get one. And it's an ornament now to my Kennedy books. Just an ornament. And it feels kind of creepy to have his face just like that. And also, it gets that distinction because O'Brien is one of the first biographers to treat JFK as a study in history, as opposed to what I mentioned a couple of days ago, exhuming his corpse and walking around in his skin to make your own points. JFK invites that. A handful of presidents invite that. He invites that. Nobody ever thinks to do that about Taft, although it was in the New York Times. The New York Times, the Sunday magazine of the New York Times this week had the Taft Supreme Court. And I was joking with my friend Sam that I'm the only person he's ever going to meet who can open that 2-page spread and identify all of those men. Every one of them. I know there's stories of every one of them. I know their not only their opinions, but also their life stories. I was trying to feed Sam some breadcrumbs. Okay, Taft is right there in the middle because he's Chief Justice. What about the guy with the big white mustaches? You surely know him. No, no, it was Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. And also all the way at the end, there's Brandeis. But nobody ever does that with Taft. But people do that kind of pantomiming with JFK, and this author doesn't at all. So he doesn't do that at all, and he treats JFK as a serious study of history rather than as a reason to just reel off anecdotes, feel-good anecdotes of one kind or another. JFK inspires a lot of that too. So does Lincoln, so does Queen Elizabeth II, a lot of that. And I don't see what it's for. I don't see what good it does. It certainly isn't what their subjects would have wanted. But anyway, I finally have a copy of this thing. That is so great. So there you go. That was a trip to the Brattle pre-rain. If the worst scenario manifests, it's going to rain for the next 4 days. And the reason that makes a difference is because the sale lot at the Brattle, the bargain carts are outdoors. So they are tarped over or wheeled inside or brought down to the basement or put under board when it's raining. There's no enjoying the outside sale lot when it's raining. So I probably won't go until the weather is clear. That's why I overindulge. That plus, I just need more books. So let's do a Steve Pyramid. I finally found Michael O'Brien's Life of John F. Kennedy. Fantastic. I got a Life of Admiral Sims. Good Lord. Pure Steve book. I got a book about the Royal Navy in World War II. Did not know it existed. What a joy it will be to read. Then The Mighty Endeavor in a hardcover, very much worth a reread. These things will probably, a higher significant portion of them than usual, will get a reread tonight because there are fewer so-called workbooks that are calling for my attention. Then Odd Jobs by John Updike. Don't really have an explanation for it except the buying fever that comes over you when you're in the sale lot. History of the Titanic, End of the Dream, biography of George III. This thing, really the find of the day, the naval writings of Erskine Childers. This galley copy of The Seventh Samurai with clippings in it, and 4 Louis Lamore novels. 4 little Louis Lamore mass market paperbacks. So there you go. That was my trip to the Brattle on a wonderful Bonnie day. Of course, the thing that goes along with rain for 4 days is clouds, which means the temperature will go back down into the 50s and 40s at night, Fahrenheit, which is always a little bit of a drag, but it won't last forever. And God Almighty, the opposite is coming. So that's it. That's the Brattle for today. I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.